Okay. I'm really excited to get started to chat with everybody today. Thanks to BSN for giving me the opportunity to work with them to be able to speak to some coaches and really get some outreach here and explain a little bit about just, how we work in our program here at Friends University. I've been here about 4 seasons, 10 years into collegiate coaching. Had some decent amount of success at the cross country and track and field programs. A lot of it really comes down to a couple different factors, which I think we're going to focus on today. Primarily building some expectations from the beginning, whether it's the beginning of your career at a program or the beginning of a season. And then really sticking to what those expectations are, which when we get into it a little bit here, are going to be more process driven and not results driven. And then looking at results as a byproduct, that's a big piece of it. And then understanding some tricks of the trade, especially with track and field, some commonalities, whether you're at a small school and need kids from other sports, or you have people that are solely focusing on the sport of cross country or track and field, finding some commonalities where you can see some success, not solely in one event, but maybe multiple events. I guess I'll start with talking about how it is that we really work within our program on balancing team expectations, specifically from an individual sports standpoint. Track and field is an individual and a team sport, but collectively it's a team sport due to scoring points from individual performances. So it's a tricky sport to really navigate, knowing that you're going to have athletes on your team who will be, relay warriors. We'll kind of dive into that a little bit here too. You're going to have people who are going to be doing individual events who can rack up a lot of points for you from a team standpoint there, and that's how they best benefit their program. But when it comes to the beginning of the year and figuring out how we balance those team expectations, as a coaching staff, we sit down and we really try to figure out, how we want it to be as a team and understand that there's little nuances individually within that. When it comes to individual event groups, when you talk about sprints, jumps, hurdles, throws, we try to make sure that when we're making team expectations for the team, when we know those are individual events, is that we try to focus on them as an event group versus looking at athlete A is going to do really well in the 100-meter dash this year. She might have the potential to either make it to state or do well at conference, make it to the national championships. It's looking at, from a group standpoint, how it is that we can develop that sprint group. How can we have some diversity within that group? If you take sprints for an example, can we fill the events from the 60 dash, 200, 400 indoors, and the 100, 200, 400 outdoors? You look at the jumps and there's high jump, long jump, triple jump, and pole vault. From a jump standpoint, you might not have pole vault due to resources or whatever that might be, but you can look at it from a standpoint of how do we fill the long jump, triple jump, and high jump? Can we place so many people within the top 8 at a conference meet? Can we have X amount of athletes qualify for the national championships? What we do within our program here specifically for event groups is that we set ranges within the event group. So if it is that we have a women's long jump group, we want to know what the bottom end of that looks like and the top end of that looks like. I think some advanced metrics from a college standpoint, the U.S. Coaches Association for Track and Field and Cross Country, they do a really good job. They do event rankings throughout the course of the year. We actually utilize that as some of our event group goals. And they basically take 4 athletes and they average out what that average distance is for like a women's long jump or a men's pole vault or, a men's shot put. And it tells you what kind of team they have in that area. We started doing that and adapting that within our program to know that's kind of what we want. It kind of helps us with recruiting as well, knowing what type of person that we want there. Helps us for some expectations from an individual standpoint. When it comes to the team aspect of it regarding relays, we try to be really cautious when we're balancing the relays and the individual events. I know there's a lot of coaches out there when you go on athletic.net mile split, and we look at a lot of high school stuff all the time here in our program. We see a lot of relay warriors, but we have no idea what they can do individually. And it takes away from what the success could be for that individual person if we can't really see where their success can be individually, because we want to have a fair share of having both. Doing some relay success and having some individual success. I know at smaller programs, the focus becomes more maybe if you can get to the state meet or maybe a national championship or do well at conference within a relay, but it's always good to kind of mix those in there. So we have some expectations to make it more of a team when we're balancing that relay into individual events, knowing that people will be a part of a relay, and we kind of enforce that. We also look at balancing expectations from like a secondary sports standpoint. Track and field is the ultimate secondary sport. Everyone in high school who's doing track and field for the most part is either doing, football, soccer in the fall. If you have that in the fall and the winter, they might be doing basketball, they're swimming, or they're wrestling. They could be even in the spring. You've got some baseball kids who also do track. You have softball kids who do track, and you have baseball kids who do track. So it's understanding some strategies that help your team have some buy-in with dual and tri and quad sport athletes. One of the big ones that we talk about with our athletes or people that we might bring in that are that way is that we reinforce that, like, the track and field skills that you learn really supplement your primary sport, regardless of the performance. So the focus really is the improvement on the supplementary skill. If you take football players, for example, they always talk about having football players on your track team, and allows you not only to get some more numbers out there, you might be able to put together a relay, some things like that. It's understanding for them that some of them are not going to go out there and blaze out the track in the 100 and the 200 meters. But if you can see over the course of a 100-meter dash that you improve by 0.4 from when you start the season to end the season, those are speed, explosion, balance, spatial awareness, coordination skills that's going to translate directly to their sport in the fall. Same thing with soccer when it comes to coordination. We talk about basketball, all those different sports. So when they're coming in and you kind of have them kind of on the fence, if they really want to buy into what it is and the team, what you expect of them is understanding, okay, from their standpoint, we want to develop their skills to not only do well in the season, but for them to actually take this with them into the next season of what their primary sport is. That's a big buy-in sell for us, and we are able to get athletes to really buy into what that is and to our goals as well when we start talking about what some of the tangible goals for the season might be. The second thing that we talk about, versatility in sports makes you a better athlete overall. Numerous examples out there of multi-sport athletes who have success at the next level in their primary sport. I'm in Kansas City area, if you will, a couple hours from Kansas City, and everyone loves Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is an incredible tri-sport athlete. Of course, he focused on football down the line. Having some of those supplemental things, the versatility, it really, really helps out in the long run. So even if it is that they know track might not be their future, but in that moment, they're there understanding that there is some long-term ramifications of learning and growing within the sport. Again, not always results driven, but it's more process driven of knowing if I can get better in these intangible things that, I can do better in my sport in the next season. The third big thing for us, marketability and recruitment at the next level. When you look at high school kids nowadays, every high school kid is looking at the fact that they want to see if they can do it at the next level, whether it's at a junior college level. They're looking at Division IIIs, Division IIs, Division Is, NAI programs like ourselves. They're really focusing on trying to figure out how can they be marketable at the next level to have fun doing a sport that they really love. In some of those situations, maybe a little bit more a scholarship to help the affordability for college too, for the 4 or 6 years that they might be going to school. Coaches love multi-sport athletes. For the college coaches who are on here and listening, that you want athletes who have done multiple sports because the relatability in coaching makes it easier. Those athletes have larger intangible skill sets. When you talk about balance, the coordination, spatial awareness, mobility, all of those types of things, they have more of those skill sets than those people who really just focus on the one. So versatility is important. Also, just more instances of overcoming adversity. Having that happen on the basketball court and on the track really puts you a leg up when it comes to leadership and like mental toughness, the sports psyche of being an athlete at the next level. Your secondary sport, honestly, could end up being the scholarship opportunity you get at the next level as well. That happened to myself as a high school athlete and looking, into the college level and seeing what that did for me. It happens to a lot of athletes out there where this quote unquote secondary sport that they have could end up being a primary sport for them down the line. So that's kind of how we balance the expectations for those athletes with we are their secondary sport or tertiary sport, where they're doing other sports and they come and see us in the spring. We do this exercise at the beginning of every year. with our students. And it's an exercise that I always encourage the coaches that I talk to when they're trying to figure out how do you establish a culture with people from individual sports, team sports, multiple sports, if we're their primary or secondary. It's something that kind of puts us all on the same page. I call it the Post-it note exercise. We all get into a classroom. I give every single athlete a pen or paper, and I give them a Post-it note. And I tell them, I said, you're going to get 5 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and understand that before you do this as a coach, understand that the expectations that you're trying to establish here are going to be process driven and not results driven. So as you're establishing what you want your team expectations to be as a team with your athletes involved, that they need to understand we're not looking for results. We're looking for how it is we manage to get to that championship or to state or whatever it is the goals may be after the fact. But we give them this Post-it note, and I say, what are 3 words that describe your best cultural experience? Whether that's on this team, on any other team you've been on before, on any club. It doesn't even have to be athletic. It could be a science-driven club. It could be forensics. It could be speech, or in any group that you've been a part of. It could be a Bible study. It could be anything at home, outside of school. Write down 3 words that describe the culture and how you felt when it was like really something you really, really enjoyed. I give them a few minutes. And after you give them a few minutes, I go around the room one at a time. And we're in a room with a chalkboard or a whiteboard. And I ask them to share as a group. So as each individual stands up, they give me 3 words. I write the words on the board. As each athlete goes through the room and someone has a common word, I'll put a tally mark next to the common word. Or if it's a similar word but not the same, I'll still write it as an additional word on the board. And you go through the room. What you realize is that there's going to be words once you get through the entire team. I think you'll realize there are many words that will show up that there's a ton of tally marks next to. Everyone shares some commonalities there. You're going to find words that are synonyms. So people are looking at it and it might be toughness or it might be grit. 2 different words that mean the same thing. Overcoming adversity, family, faith, attitude, competitive, those types of words. And what you do is you have an open discussion after you have them there. And what you try to do the best of your ability is that you try to consolidate this board of words. You're going to have some that you want to stick to. You try to consolidate those words down to about 4 to 6 words that you really can identify within your program to start the year. So that ups, downs, whatever it is you're going through, this is what we stand by. This is what we stand for. This is what really gets me engaged. This is what makes me committed. And then understand that throughout the course of the season, after you've had this type of conversation with your team and you've written these words down, what I've done is I've turned them into a little bit of a diagram. If there's anyone here after the fact of this and want to reach out to me, I can definitely send you a couple of different diagrams that we've made with these consolidated words. And I've laminated these diagrams and I've had them put them in their backpack. And so that we know that if we're going through tough times, it's a thing that we know we have there with us as a refresher, and that it reminds us what we're doing this. The expectations for us, our standard is that we want to be family-based. So if it is you come in with a negative attitude, you're having a bad day, and you feel like you're veering off the path, this is something that you can look at to remind yourself, or a coach can pull you aside and say, hey, let's take a look at this. And from that, we can establish, okay, yeah, maybe I'm not on that, and I need to reinforce something that we've all really agreed to or committed to. It's a really good exercise. It really helps us out. Team expectations. It really helps us build a decent culture. That's a foundational piece to what it is that we do every single fall. And we talk about the different expectations, balancing the individual and those who are coming from other sports. So you might have, if you're a college coach, recruited them from a basketball team to come and be a high and long jumper, and they love playing basketball. Trying to figure out how you meet in the middle with them so that they can commit to what it is that you're looking for, but then that they can buy into you and what it is that you're trying to do within their program. Once you have that buy-in, the training and everything that you're doing is going to be a lot easier for your athletes to buy into. But it becomes a process-driven, establishment of what it is that we're trying to do here. What kind of processes are we setting in place so that the results become a byproduct? The second big thing that we really look at, and we're going to talk about here today, is training commonalities. So when you start really working with your team, track has 27 different events. If you're in the NAIA, You also have race walk, which is another variable for you and trying to figure that piece out as well. So there's a lot of different variations of what events somebody can do in track and field, whether you're a sprinter, jumper, hurdler, distance runner, middle distance runner. Vaulters don't always count as the jumping group because they're always doing some more technical work than the long and triple. But there's a lot of commonalities within the sport that I always try to pinpoint when we're looking at athletes and how they can be versatile for your team, especially with smaller programs. If you're coming from a small town, you're at a smaller college, we don't always all get the luxury of being in a program where I can go recruit a guy who just runs the 200 and that's it. We have to have some versatility to be successful as a team. The first thing I'll talk about is crossover compatibility. So what I mean by that is looking at some compatibility, not apples to apples in someone ran track in high school and now they're running in college, or they've been running track since their freshman year and you're trying to get them on your team, but more so from other sports, knowing that we're primarily a secondary sport if you're identifying people or pieces to supplement what you're looking for in your program. So I'm going to identify them in a couple different ways. I'm going to identify it by the sport, but I'm also going to identify it by the skill set, or I'll call it the energy system, if you will, because the way we do training, a lot of it is energy system specific. I'll start with what it looks like from fall sports to come into spring. You got football players. A lot of football players are speed, strength, and power based. And so the commonalities there is you're going to get a football guy. He's probably going to sprint for you. He's probably going to jump for you. And he's probably going to throw for you. Those are some things that they're probably going to be able to do for you. Finding middle and long distance runners from a football program is probably pretty challenging because long distance running is aerobic based. And there's not much aerobic conditioning when it comes to football. It's a lot of anaerobic conditioning and like lactic threshold conditioning, the starting and the stopping. But anytime that you're starting, it's fast and explosive and powerful. But you will be able to identify some athletes from the football program in that way and how they translate to your program. I'd say soccer is another big one. Soccer is more lactic threshold and semi-aerobic anaerobic. So you're talking your 400, your 800 runners. You're not really going to find 2-mile guys out there because they're not just, soccer players aren't just strictly doing aerobic running. A lot of them are doing some, I would say, speed endurance, special endurance for those who are deeper into the track and field terminologies. That's kind of what they're doing, a little bit more starting and stopping, but the cumulative distance that they may cover in the course of a particular game makes them fit for those 400, 800 range. If you're in the NAI, you've got the 1,000, you kind of maybe potentially get up to like a 4x8, the mile potentially, but lactic threshold, you're going to find some success there as well. Volleyball is athletic elasticity and reactive power, a lot of up and down, a lot of lateral movements. You're going to find your long jump, your triple jump, your high jump, and even some of your pole vault from that. There's not a lot of the way that the movement is for sports like volleyball or even basketball, even sprinting up and down the court isn't as clean and fluid as seamless sprinting from the 100-meter dash or 200-meter dash. Not saying those athletes can't do that, but the way that they train and the primary focus is going to be more reactive power based. It's probably going to take a little bit more work to take a volleyball player or a basketball player and get them up to where you need them to be on the 100 meters and the 200 meters if they're really focusing on that to be successful. But volleyball and basketball kind of fall into that category of elasticity, reactive power. You're going to find a lot of good jumpers out of that. Wrestling. I've had a number of wrestlers in the past where they've been quality 400 and 800 runners for us, where you're talking about someone like a pole vaulter who needs full body strength and spatial awareness. Wrestling is a great sport for that, to identify athletes who can go out there and do well in, some of those events. And they have a higher pain threshold. So you talk about lactic threshold and resistance of slowing down. You're going to be able to find some athletes there. Swimming, a lot of good aerobic capacity. Form work might need to, be worked on. The same with hockey. Hockey's that way as well. I've had some athletes who've come over from hockey and done some good stuff sprint wise. But they have more of an aerobic base because of the constant movement that they're doing. And then when you look at a sport like, of course, cross country, you're going to find a lot of aerobic capacity, translatabilities for them to come over and be your distance runners on your track team. A couple things I will mention to kind of wrap up a little bit, some do's and don'ts. When I look at commonalities and events, and when I've seen, high school coaches and even some college coaches explore different events in track and field, I'll preface it with this. I pride myself in developing some really good multi-athletes here at Friends. We have some great decathletes, some great heptathletes. They pretty much cover the spread on being good hurdlers, jumpers, sprinters, a little bit of throws. And then that small percentage of 5 to 9%, if you will, of training that may be over the course of the year, that's aerobic for a men in the 1500 or the women's. Even the 800, it's more anaerobic based, but a little bit of aerobic work. So there are a lot of commonalities in track where you can really get the best out of an athlete if you do it right. And then there's some that are really counterintuitive. The first one I'll address is just the cross country and track, having them paired together. Cross country and power speed events, most of the time, I try to refrain from that. The reason why, and there's a caveat to that, and I'll mention it in a minute, but the reason why is pretty scientific. So when it comes to training, an aerobic energy system base can be built in about 3 to 5 weeks. You can start seeing some adaptations. That's scientifically proven. From an anaerobic standpoint, you're talking ATP energy system, max velocity, even some speed endurance for your 200, 400 runners. It takes 2.5 times the amount of training to have that adaptation. So that's why you will see sprint coaches developing the 10, 20, 30 repetitions in a training cycle before they get to the point where they're doing 30 to 60s, flying 30s potentially, or ladders, before they get to even doing, 120s, 150s, 180s, or broken 400s or any of that. So it's a really tricky thing when you start putting sprinters who run the 100 and the 200, and they're saying that they're wanting to do cross country to stay in shape for track. Staying in shape for track for a 100 meter and 200 meter runner is tempo running. And you can do tempo running that's at a slower pace, but at a lot smaller volume. And so that's the caveat to if they're going to be on the cross country team. If you're going to have sprinters, you're going to have jumpers who are doing cross country that they want to be conditioned for the track and field season, I'd strongly advise having some altered training where the volume is down. You start looking at tempo based work, which is about 65 to 75% of their maximum output, and start having some variations in that. So they can do that with the cross country team. But having them be fully immersed in aerobic training, there's going to be a lot that you're going to have to undo going into the track season because of the time it takes to build an anaerobic energy system. So that's a big one. I'll mention a big do for me that doesn't happen enough at the high school level. Jumps and individual sprints. There's a lot of jumpers out there when they do long and triple jump. You can go on mile split and you can see their meets. They do a lot of long jump and triple jump. They never sprint. And what happens is they kind of get pace locked into this thing where if I put them on the track, and I know they probably run about 11.6, 11.7 to 100 if you're a guy who's long jumping, you're 18, 19 feet. That big barrier to 21, 22 isn't even running sub 11. It's getting you to the 11.3 range, 11.4 range. It gives you a little bit more speed so that you have more to work with. What my rule of thumb is understanding how to control 85% of your maximum speed on takeoff with jumps. And if your 85% is slower than the next person, then you're not going to jump as far. And so it's trying to increase your speed so that 85% of your maximum speed is faster. And so I always try to really encourage jumps and individual sprints, even if it's just a tried and true, I run 100 and I long jump and triple jump. You're going to see some improvements, like I mentioned earlier, of seeing the process. If you can see the supplemental skill of that speed and that explosion for the 100, you go from 11.7 to 11.3. You might not be making it a state in the 100, but it's definitely going to translate in the long jump for you. Any running event and the 4x4 is a do. Lactic acid threshold training is really translatable to all track and field events. So even if you have jumpers, there's research that even shows 200 meter, 400 meter training for high jumpers at the highest level really helps them get to where they need to get to, because you have to jump your highest later in the competition, which is running your best later in a meet or in your race in a 200 or a 400. There's some commonalities in that, even with some jumpers. And so for those high schooler coaches that are doing it, and college coaches that'll put 2 and 3 4x4s in an invitational and have a lot of your people exposed to that, I would say that's a big do for me. That's a big green light. I would continue to encourage that. The other thing I'll mention with do's and don'ts, hurdles in individual events. Same thing with jumps. You catch a lot of hurdlers doing the short hurdles and the long hurdles, and that's it. What you're going to realize is that they're going to get stuck into a specific sprint pace, and it's not very advantageous for them to get better at hurdles. especially when it comes to training. Knowing the difference between your speed in an open race versus the speed with hurdles, that time differential is something that you're going to try to minimize. We work with our 400 hurdles with that all the time. You know, we talk about at the world-class level, it's like a 2-second differential between an open 400 and a 400 hurdles. At our level, it's probably at the nationals level with the 400 and the open, or the 400 hurdles, it's about 3 seconds or so for a good 400 hurdler. And at the high school level, you're going to see it might be about 4 seconds or so. The closer that gap gets, the better of a hurdle that they get. Specifically, when you talk about the short hurdles. You know, when you're adapting from 5-stepping to 4-stepping to 3-stepping, that's speed development. That's the only way that happens. Training it more and trying to find I don't want to call it cheat, but tricks that allow you technically to 3-step actually become a disadvantage as you continue to grow as an athlete, because you'll start seeing female athletes in particular, when the hurdle height doesn't change, there's bad habits that they've had in order to teach themselves how to 3-step that they have to learn how to undo now that they've developed speed, because they're taking too much time over the hurdle. On the men's side as well, it starts happening. So I would really encourage hurdlers and coaches who are looking at hurdlers to put them in individual events. The Open 200 is a perfect event, you know, because it's long enough where you're building that. You can get the explosiveness, you get the speed, and it's short enough where you're not out there always putting them in the 400, and they might not be that great at the 400, they might not love the 400. But for those who are doing like 300 hurdles in high school and short hurdles, the 200 is a nice middle ground for that. And even tossing them into a 4x4 where there's less pressure, you're just moving the stick, and you worry about race strategy more than you worry about your time. And so it makes it more of a fun environment for them to build that. Those are big do's and don'ts for me. Those are the big ones that I start with. There's some nuanced things here and there, but those ones I'll touch on today. In the end, I'll talk about how different trends, it varies from athlete to athlete. I would say I love coaches that don't hesitate to explore events that are common in training, that know that their athlete could find success. Because at the end of the day, the nice thing about track and field, with however many events there are, is that you can be very successful at a number of things, because there's commonalities in the training, but it's finding the 1 or 2 things that really allow you to be super successful, that get you to maybe that state meet, to become all state, to go to college and run, to even be on the world stage. I wrote a couple athletes down just for those people who are wondering what that actually means. First one I wrote down is Christian Taylor. Christian Taylor was one heck of a 400 runner out of high school, and he went to Florida, and he's a pretty good 400 runner, 45 seconds, you know, D1 caliber. But that 45-second speed was able, with his length, he was able to take that speed and that strength from the 45-second training that he was able to have and translate that on the triple jump runway, and became arguably one of the best triple jumpers in the history of triple jump, aside from him being centimeters short of that world record in his career so far. You look at someone like Grant Holloway. He was a long jumper and a hurdler, and you can even dig into some of the training he was doing that was doing some tempo work for him to be versatile for his team, 4x1 and 4x4 duty at Florida, before he really specialized in the hurdles as a pro. Tara Davis is another one, another person who does long jump and the hurdles and was good at the Division I level, doing both of those. And there's commonalities in both of those trainings, but you can also dig in there and you can see that she did some relay duty for her team, was able to do some sprinting to see those improvements. And then the last one I'll mention is Tobi Amusin. And it's the woman from Nigeria who just broke the 100-meter hurdle record. And she was a very quality 100-meter, 200-meter runner. And there's a lot of reps that she's done in that in order to prepare herself for the 60 hurdles and 100-meter hurdles to go out even to the Worlds this past fall, to see the success that she saw. She was able to improve speed-wise and able to do that. It wasn't just hurdles alone. I would say as a whole, that's all I'm really going to cover today. But the big things is really noticing some strategies for team expectations. That's the baseline of really getting the success you need. It's not all about getting excellent training. It's about making sure we're all on the same page of what it is that we want out of this experience. Some people might want it for different reasons, and that's okay. If you're coming there and you have the attitude that I want to get after this and I want to get better, the why is something that, we can work on later. It's the what, that we really need to work on, that we're all on the same page on what it is that we're doing, and that they all have a why. They don't have a why, the what's going to be pretty hard to really develop. And then some pointers here, at least a starting point, jumping off point for some people as far as training commonalities, what we really look at to exercise to maximize and exercise like the best versatility for the athletes on our team to continue to win conference championships. Because at the NAI level for us, there's not one athlete on our team who just does one event at the conference championships. They're doing 2 and they're doing 3, or they might be in a relay. And it's trying to figure out what those things are. And it's really diving into where the commonalities are, what sports translate, and what I kind of should avoid so that I can get the best out of that athlete and give them the best experience. I know from here, they talked about some question and answer. I think we wanted to open it up to that for any coaches out there who might have questions on some of the things that I asked on or want me to elaborate on a couple different things that I might have talked on, whether it's the team expectation points of it and what we do there, goal setting and team expectations, or even some other things that we work on as we narrow down what it is or broaden what we do for training events for some of the athletes on our team.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Coach. This was a wonderful presentation. I hope a lot of our track coaches on today got some good info to take away into their practices. One question I got through the private chat was, what are your off-season expectations for your athletes? And do they shift if they are a multi-sport athlete? Coach, were you able to hear me okay? Coach Brun, can you hear me?
Here we go. Let's see. So we've got one here. Once a hurdler learns how to 3-step, should they then focus on the speed side? Yes and no. I would say it's a tricky thing. With men, it's different than women. So on the women's side, 3-stepping with the hurdles being lower, speed is what's going to be important, because the faster that they get, the quicker that the technique for lead leg getting down and trail leg getting through is going to be really important, because you're trying to minimize the time that you're off the ground. Now, when it comes to the men's side, it's speed matters to a point. When you start watching videos, if you look at like the world-class level, and you start talking about someone like Grant Holloway is so fast that he is cramming his 3 steps in between the hurdles. And so sometimes that actually slows him down. You see that in some of the races, how, I think some of his inconsistency is kind of attributed to that sometimes, of figuring out that stride pattern in between. But I would say it's an ebb and it's a flow. So if you're going to be working on the speed side of things in order to get the 3-stepping and going, I would say a good rule of thumb on how it is that you get better at that is really doing reps on and reps off. If you're putting a hurdle down in between hurdle 2 and hurdle 4, so you can feel the 6 steps that you take in between, you can start really getting into your rhythm. And so it's tying some of those types of things in, but it's an ebb and a flow. If they can't 3-step, you're probably going to have to spend 60% of your time on speed and 40% of it on hurdle technique, because the hurdle technique isn't the problem. It's that they're not covering enough ground in the speed between. And then it's trying to integrate that, because if you can pull from your lead leg off and your trail leg pushes through on your hurdle, you're going to be able to 3-step a bit easier. But speed does really matter in it, but it's kind of an ebb and a flow on that. Hopefully that answers kind of what that is. Another question, can you elaborate on how you use the national ranking within your team to set goals and training? So the way that the national, I said that the volume, give me 1 second. My volume should be good.
Yeah, Coach, can you hear us at all?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, there we go. I for some reason, Saxon was talking and you couldn't hear, but we're all good now.
Okay. So the question, can you elaborate on how you use national rankings within your team to set goals and training? So on USTF-CCCA, which is the U.S. Track and Field and Coaches Association across country, during the season, I think it's about 2 or 3 weeks in, they come out with these quote unquote squad rankings. So squad rankings, they take the top 4 people on particular teams and they add those up and they average them out, so you kind of know where your squad ranks. And you can actually divide that not only nationally, but you can divide that regionally. And so for me, when we're looking at the expectations for the season, I know within our region, I know our biggest competitors and our teams and what that really looks like and what we need out of particular events. I'll give you a perfect example of what we did last year. So we started really developing the pole vault program here. It wasn't something we focused on in the past. It was an area in our conference where it's a little bit weaker of an area, but we can exercise getting some points there that really help our team total. And we brought in a good pole vault coach and things like that. What we needed to find out was how good do we need to have our pole vault team to be successful at that conference level? But then also, if we're going to recruit a kid, how does that benefit us on a national level? You know, because if we recruited some, pole vaulters who are going 14 feet, helps us at conference level. But then if we're giving bigger scholarships and things like that, then, and they only go 14 and the national standard is 15.3, it doesn't really benefit us there. So we were trying to cover both, which is a tricky thing to try to do, be good at conference and nationals in a number of events, especially an event that you're not very good at historically. But we use these to kind of gauge what our goals should be for the season. And basically how it is that, how we want to train for the season. So if we know that our bottom end, I think we ended up being number 2 in the country in the men's pole vault last year indoors. And I think Indiana Tech ended up being number 1. I think it was close to that. We were number 1 for a period and then we dropped down. But it gave us a good note that we were moving in the right direction with the pole vaulters we had, knowing that not every program in the country does pole vault. We're doing it well. And we're able to see at a national level, specifically when you know that the top 16 automatically get to go to nationals. If we don't have 16 qualifiers, it allows us to know that we're moving in that direction. So we're able to set some trends there or set some goals there within the training that we're doing with that. Triple jump is another example for us that we're trying to, do this year. We have a good women's group in triple jump. I look at those rankings and you see what an average is, and the average that's probably going to be number 1 might be 11.3. I'd say 11.3 or so, 11.4. It might be around there. We've got a couple girls who can be around there. We've got some that might be under. We kind of talk about that as a coaching staff. How can we get all of our girls to 11 meters? Not only is that part of the recruiting part of it, but then looking at, okay, being more specific on the training that we're doing. It allows us to revisit training plans that we've written. We know we have some tried and true techniques that we do, but then if we know there's things that we really need to work on, if third phase is it, phase 3, is this year with some of these returners, because that's what it is for us this year. We get to sit down as a coaching staff, and I work with our jumpers specifically, and I get to sit down and build some training in there that really helps us emphasize that to know that we can see the results that we need to see. But I usually use those as a rule of thumb when you look at the national rankings to know how we want to set goals for the year. I look at last year's going to this year. You can even do it at a high school level when you're looking at state rankings. It gives you an idea kind of what the potential of the team could be. So if you take like relays, for example, relays are pretty big, especially in Kansas with the 1A through 4A, some smaller schools getting relays to the state meet. You'll be able to go in, if you do enough research, you'll be able to see some of the upperclassmen that graduate, and you'll see some opportunity. And if as a coaching staff, we got 3 girls who are returning from last year, but we don't have 1. When I started talking about training commonalities and crossover abilities, this is when you put that to work. You use that fall and use that winter season, and you're like, okay, we need one piece. That one piece, if we're trying to run sub 50 seconds to make it through our regional meet to get to state, that one piece has got to be a sub 13 girl. Who do we got out here that could be a sub 13 girl? You start looking at what commonalities are, and you start seeing where you can find that within the programs there. It makes it easier to have that as a selling point for a dual sport athlete to join your team in the spring as well. Because if they understand what their role is, and not so much you run fast, we want to run fast, it's very ambiguous. They don't need to know the specifics. They don't need to run 48.5 and you're going to help us do this and this and this. But giving them a specific role allows them to have a bit better of a buy-in on what that is. And it allows you to manage your expectations with that particular athlete, knowing that they might exceed that expectation, but you knew what that role is and they know what it is. So you guys are on the same page. So I usually use rankings a lot with that. You'll see me a lot on TFRS for those who know what that is. If you don't, and your high school coach is tfrrs.org. And you can find all results for college meets all the way back to like 2010 on there. You can go back and you see rankings. They do a lot of dividing things up. They do a good job of that on there, you're able to use a lot of that and you're able to strategize with those things to see what your season is supposed to look like. And then you can figure out if you need to expand somebody or if you can keep somebody narrow enough where they can be successful in what they need to because they have an opportunity to do really well at that one thing. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit on the national rankings thing and advanced metrics and stats and like kind of what we're looking at in order to be successful. We always try to find a way to fill every event, and how we do that successfully. A lot of it goes to looking at some previous trends and stats and data and telling us what we need.
Coach, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Awesome. So I got a question, private messages. They said, what are your expectations of your athletes during the off season? And do they differ if they're a multi-sport athlete?
That's a good question. So the expectations in the off season with college track, it's kind of challenging just because we have a preseason kind of where we're working on general stuff. We're really getting into it now. And with having a full indoor and full outdoor season, we start pretty much December, January and roll all the way through May. But when you talk about summer and you talk about fall, I would say what we try to make sure we do, and this is the first thing is really important, and it's making sure that you have intentional rest periods for your athletes. Because if you don't, you're going to burn out. So the expectation might be for the first 2 weeks after the season is over is to rest your body. As much as they're eager and they just got off a state and they ran a PR and they're like, man, I just want to keep racing. There's some advantage to jumping into, the summer circuits with like AAU and all of that with high school. But even then, there probably has to be somewhat of a little bit of a rest period, because if you're going to go from March all the way through July without a rest period, you're going to start seeing a decline in performance, or you're going to start seeing some injury and more fatigue, just because they're going to bottom out. When you talk about periodizing training, you need to have intentional breaks. The other thing that's really important, I call it active rest. So doing that within reason. If it is that you want to go, in our fall, permittable intramurals we let our kids do, sand volleyball, sand volleyball actually helps us out a lot because they're barefoot in the court, and there's a lot of foot strength and ankle strength and leg strength that they get and stability strength that they get out of it. And there's minimal risk for like injury in it because you're falling on the sand. It's just like being long jump and triple jump, and like they can have fun doing that. So that's something that we do. When it comes to being a dual sport athlete, that becomes a communication thing with the other coaches. I would say it's trying to build some rapport with those other coaches and understanding you're not saying your sport is better than the other. But at the same time, it's figuring out which sport's the supplementary sport, which sport is the primary sport, and trusting that the other coach, it has that athlete's best interest in mind. So if it is, take football and track, for example. In football season, I try not to mess with the football kids when they're doing football. They're out there and they're doing power, explosive work. They're in the weight room. They're doing all the things similarly to an extent without, track kids are not doing physical contact in the way of football, but they're doing a lot of the common training. After they get done with football season, I usually sit down with each athlete individually because it all depends. If you're on the football team and you were a kicker on the football team, you might be able to come out and start training after a week and a half. If you were the running back on the football team, it might be like 2.5 weeks because your body's kind of beat up from all the hits and everything and just the contact. And we kind of ease you into the training of what it is that we're doing to get ready for the track season. Basketball is similar. Basketball, it's knees, joints, all that kind of stuff. There is some rest that's needed from that, because as much as people think that that's not as taxing on your body, it really is, especially when they come over and they might be a high jumper or a long jumper. They might start, when we write a yearly plan and we're doing some elementary things now where it might be 3-step, 5-step, just pop-ups, or just some lower over the bar work for like high jump early season. That might be where the basketball players start, but they're going to jump the learning curve a bit quicker than you would with a typical year-round track athlete, just because they have a base under them of fitness and all of that where they can jump in. But I kind of treat it case by case, but I try to respect that relationship with the other coach, understanding that I honestly might not be the primary sport, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. As long as I look at the athlete and I want to give them an experience that's rewarding for them, especially at the college level, I have to have tougher conversations sometimes with athletes where, if they don't understand that this is just something to supplement their skills and they're out here and having fun, If the athlete's expectation is, I want to be all conference, I want to go to nationals, and they won't, I have to put that out there up front. Well, based on what this looks like in our conference and our stats, you're going to be someone who might be someone who can help the team marginally, or you might be an alternate on a relay, but there's a lot of good things you can get out of this for your next season, next year. If you're willing to be here, we'll go to meets and compete, but you might not be that top guy you think you're going to be, just because there's other factors. And if they're okay with that, then we explore that. If they're not okay with that, then of course they might not join our program, and that's okay too, because it gives them their off season to work with their primary sport coach, who might give them some supplementary things that realistically might be almost identical to what we're doing. But it's just in the terms of, maybe I got a football in my hand the whole time, and that's cool. I want to do it that way. That's fine too. So it's kind of having a level of openness in that off season for me is really key with dual sport athletes. And then even some flexibility and some grace a little bit for the ones who are primary sport athletes for me. When I talk about the sand volleyball thing, and having them be able to go out there and have fun. I know there's some things they're really getting from that. I'm not sitting in there and telling them like, okay, yeah, you're going to get foot strength and this and that. They're seeing it as a fun opportunity to make a track and field sand volleyball team and hopefully win an intramural championship if they're good enough. I'm seeing it as they're having fun. They're building a culture still with one another outside of the sport, which is a positive, but there's also some things that are common there for them to get some training in. But that's kind of how we navigate what off season really looks like. Rest is important. Active rest, which is safe rest, is important as well. I call it active rest, whether you're biking, you're swimming, you're rowing, the sand volleyball thing is fine. Getting out there and playing powder puff football and you might tear your ACL. I don't know. But then again, on the other side of it, you could do that in your sport. It's a really tricky thing. Coach to coach scenarios, as I guess it's within your program, you get to decide what you want that line to be. I know some coaches are stricter than others because they know that we are the primary sport. And if that's a secondary thing, I get to say, you don't get to do that. If I'm the secondary thing, I understand the primary coach is going to be able to tell you, you don't get to do that. But we have respect with one another. If I'm going to be the secondary thing and it's a football guy coming and running for me in a 4x1 in the spring or long jumping, the football coach understands that I'm only having him do these couple things because he's probably doing a little spring ball and working on his playbook and, still catching passes on the side. I understand that. And so we try to build a training plan that accommodates that as well, so the kid gets what he needs to.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I want to thank you very much for being on our platform today. We greatly appreciate it. And also big thank you to all the coaches who were able to join today. Great questions and overall great webinar. So thank you again. And I hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend.
Awesome.
Bye, everyone.